Forward to get to the gap. With MagMongoSlade. Shoot. He don't miss.
Welcome to Three Con Commentary. This is your boy MagMongoSlade. Today we're going to talk about John Cena and Randy Orton's responses to the Vince McMahon allegations. I'm going to talk about John Cena first because that one has gotten the most attention. I said I wasn't going to turn my channel into this, so I'm going to take a little bit of a deviation from what I want to do with the channel, also with the subject, because we seem to have an issue here where perfect strangers of a person think that their response is the only response to these situations, and you're supposed to respond the way that they want you to, but that's not the case. For starters, I want to say I commend both guys from answering the question and not hiding behind the old no comment, which they both could have played. Triple H can say no comment. He works for the company. Tony Khan would be able to say no comment. He works for the company. Randy Orton works for the company too. Cena is mostly as an ambassador. He comes in, he does stuff here and there, but he's not a regular talent. So for a lot of these guys, for Randy Orton, for John Cena, for some of those guys on the upper levels, Seth Rollins, these kinds of Shawn Michaels, these kinds of people, this stuff is, a lot of it is personal, because you can't separate their personal relationship from the person that they know from the business. These two things are tied together. Some of this stuff supposedly happened on WWE time. So you're talking about people who know Vince intimately, spent a lot of time with them, basically trying to work it out verbally, what's going on and how they feel. But when it comes to John Cena, I want people to recognize that John Cena wasn't asked a direct question. He's having a conversation with Howard Stern. So we're going to play some of the audio. Word to WrestleNomics for posting the audio. So we're going to play some of it. We're going to do some of the stop-start business, and we're going to just talk about it as we go forward.
You handle, this is a tough one. I know you love the WWE and you love Vince and everything, but now Vince has gotten himself into hot water. What the fuck? Like, I have a couple of friends who have gotten into hot water, let's call it. And it's so goddamn confusing because you love the guy. And at the same time, also, you don't love what he's being accused of, obviously. What do you do? I mean, how do you handle those situations? I don't know how to.
Listen, he's not asking John, what did he think that Vince is guilty or anything like that. He's asking him, how do you handle this situation? He's essentially asking for advice, right? So John Cena does what John Cena does and turns into Big Brother John, even though he's significantly younger than Howard Stern.
Well, so how do you handle yours?
Well, it's interesting. There are some people I no longer want to associate with because and it's almost not fair because it's not like they've been on trial, but there's been accusations that are disturbing. So I go, can I be personal friends with this person? And some people I can, because there's lines in my mind where things are drawn, but some people I can't because it's too big a mountain to climb. In other words, if any of this is true, I can't know you,
All right, so we're going to pause right here for a second because I've been in this situation. I wanted to talk a little bit about this. This is what I mean by a little bit of a deviation, because I've been in the situation that John Cena and all these guys have been in, where you have friends who have been accused of some really horrible things. I've watched as my mom dealt with things where she's had nephews, for instance, that was accused of some very horrible stuff, where people personally. You may have even watched them grow up. And now you're being confronted with, this person did horrible thing X. It doesn't matter what it is. All right? In Vince's case, it's these allegations. Of course, this stuff has been around for a while, but now you're in this situation where you're confronted with this gigantic case. And unlike you, me, and some of the other people who may have known people who gotten arrested or been accused of crimes, these are celebrities. So you have people, putting cameras in their face and microphones to their lips every few minutes asking them about this thing. And they have to try to figure it out. They got to try to think their way through it. But they also have to consider the public relations element of it. So we're going to talk about a little bit how, some of these other situations that I've been involved with. But let's hear what John Cena's response is.
I loved you. I love what you did for me. I love our friendship. But now that I know this about you, there's no turning back. I have to do what I morally think is right. And unfortunately, it's not to associate. But this is a guy who's been so good to you.
Sure.
And so great in your career. I imagine it's a mind fuck. And then when you get asked about it, it's like it's too complicated to even talk about.
So I don't think it's complicated to talk about. I think it's complicated to listen to. And that's kind of why I don't necessarily put a lot of time and equity into it.
Yeah.
Again, I think there's still a long ways to go.
Yeah.
I can say this. I'm a big advocate of love and friendship and honesty and communication. But in the same breath, I'm also a big advocate of accountability.
Yeah.
All right. So he's talking about the conflict, the personal relationship that you have with somebody. And this, just because you know somebody personally, just because you like them, love them, you're your best friend, they're your, whatever, family member, doesn't prevent them from doing horrible stuff. So he's talking about there needs to be some accountability, but of course, it's going to be a little bit complicated.
Me too.
I think you explained it well of if someone's behavior lies so far outside your value system that the balance shifts of like, man, I can't operate in a world where this works.
Yeah.
That's the end result of being accountable. But
all right, so he's saying right here that, if any of this stuff is true, he cannot associate, which is pretty common sense. Now, he could have just said, well, if any of this stuff is true, I just don't associate with them anymore. But they're having a conversation. They're talking it out, right? It's not just blurting out stuff that people might want to hear. So I appreciate that.
Also, what are you going to do, though?
Right now, what I'm going to do is love the person I love,
right?
Be their friend. And by that, it means like, hey, I love you. You got a hill to climb. And, there's the saying of like, hey, you don't know who you are, or you don't know who your friends are until the shit hits the fan or your back's against the wall. That doesn't make any of what's going on any easier to swallow.
Right.
But just telling somebody that like, hey, I love you, man, this is going to be a hill to climb. We're going to see what happens. And that's that. I think it sounds so cliche, but it has to be one day at a time. But at the same token, I've openly said is I love the guy. I got a great relationship with the guy. So that's that.
No, I don't think that's
all right. So as you can tell, he's basically saying got a good relationship with him, business, personal. We've seen that even after the first set of accusations, when all the NDAs and stuff was exposed, John Cena still went to the Vince McMahon birthday dinner, and they're still friends. But the question is, when he says something like you got a hill to climb, basically, you're in for it. You're in deep, right? You're at the point of no return, essentially. You're at the point where, unless you can get out from underneath this, you're not the person that I know, which is what he meant when he said, love the person I love. Because as most people have said, some people have, gone on the Bret Harts of the world. Oh yeah, this sounds like Vince. I have no respect for him. But then you have the John Cenas who say, look, this guy's done a tremendous amount of things for me, changed my life. I know him personally. This doesn't sound like the person that I know. How do I put those two things together? That the person that I know could quite possibly have been phony. And this isn't the behavior of a person that I know. And now you have to work through that. You got to work it out. You know what I'm saying? So that's where he's coming from with this. And they're not done. This whole clip is 5 minutes. So it's like another couple of minutes into it. But it's not a flat condemnation. But it is a recognition that this is going to be tough on them personally, and be tough not just on the business level, but again, like I said, personally. And for many people who have been in that situation, you gotta know that that's how it works, Now, most people have never met somebody who have been accused of such horrible things. Most people have never met that kind of scenario. But the people who have notoriously struggled with this. People who have been friends of like school shooters or child molesters or something like that. And you were like, man, how could I have not known? And then, of course, there's always the people who, the friend in school who wasn't really the friend, who, oh yeah, he was always creepy. That's what you get with a lot of the gossipies, the guy who probably spent 2 minutes total with the person saying, oh yeah, I always thought he was weird. Versus, people who, again, know him intimately, spent time with him outside of the job. People who actually talked to him, hung out with them. Those people always have a different relationship. Of course, we're not talking about Twitter, because Twitter doesn't know anybody personally. They just have these parasocial relationships where they virtue signal most of the time, They turn on you on a dime because they don't know who you are and it don't matter. But these people know each other, So John Cena is trying to have a real conversation about how to deal with this, And he's not making any concrete argument about what should be done or whatever, but basically just saying, hey, as of right now, the Vince McMahon that I know, I love him, I respect him, yada, 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 but we'll see. Because if it's proven that Vince did all these horrible things, then he has to now behave differently. He has to think differently. New information, factual information, hopefully, is now floating about that's going to affect their personal relationship. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that in terms of a response.
That's cliche at all. That's kind of been my approach. One thing I do, and I say this to my wife all the time, I said, I'm going to pick up the phone and call the guy. I don't want to sit there and hide and say, I don't want to be the kind of friend who then says, well, I'm never going to address this again.
Yeah, I think my construct of trying to operate with honesty and communication, I think those are strong leads to handling any problem or any achievement. But the whole thing is super, super unfortunate.
Yeah.
That's really the thing that sucks, because not only does it deal with an individual I love, it deals with an entity that I love.
Yeah.
And it's one that I speak highly of. And you want to make sure I want everyone to have the experience I had. If you're an employee at Disneyland, you want everybody to go to Disney and think it's the greatest place on earth. And when someone doesn't, or when you find out that there may or may not have been things going on there that, this place I was speaking so great about, well, in some aspects needed a lot of work. That's more than just how do I feel about this person. Now I shift to, okay, am I doing all I can to make it better? From the advice of like, work as hard as you can, promote as hard as you can. Is there anything I can do? So not only do I tell my friend I love them, I also switch to the entity and say, how can I help?
So he's talking about, okay, if all of this is, comes out in the wash, that is any of it is true, how can I help fix the situation? And I think that's a legitimate position. I think it's a legitimate question, because you are dealing with this on a personal level, and you are dealing with this in terms of business, because it's a little bit more complicated. But I don't see that much wrong with what John Cena says. It's not perfect, but then again, there is no perfect response. The way I look at what John Cena says, I'm taking it back to when I was a kid. This is before we get into Randy Orton. We'll get into Randy Orton's response too. When I was a kid, I had a best friend in the world. Spent the night over his house. We watched wrestling, played video games, all kinds of stuff. Knew his dad. Dad was a great guy. Dad was, fun dude. Hung out all the time. We went places, did stuff. When we were teenagers, his dad is arrested for child molestation. Supposedly molested a stepdaughter. And I watched my friend try to figure it out. Because the first response you're going to have is bullshit. It's not true. That's your first response. This is somebody that you know. In his situation, this was his dad. We spent so much time together. Hell, he might as well have been my uncle. So your first response is bullshit. It's not true. But then you start to think about it. And then you start hearing the stories. And then maybe you get hold of the police report. Maybe you listen to both sides of the story. Whatever the case may be. And then you say, what do you do? Now again, we're not celebrities, so nobody's going to walk up to you and put a microphone in your face and say, hey, what do you think about? But you're a teenager. When I was a teenager when this occurred, and you're like, yeah, your best friend's dad is a child molester, and he used to hang out with them, and you're his son's best friend. What do you think about that? And you're like, whoa, that is not the person that I know. We never saw anything that would say that this guy was a child molester. Nothing. But that doesn't mean that it didn't happen. But it also doesn't mean that it was true. Now, long story short, Dad pled guilty to child molestation. The situation was, the way that it was explained is, I'm just going to take the L rather than going to court and getting a longer ride. And so you have to think and say, well, as you grow up, you're like, well, that's a legitimate defense, Plenty of people plead guilty to crimes that they didn't commit. But then you also say, like, well, maybe he did it. There was so much evidence that he did do it. And does he really want his sons coming to these court proceedings and hearing that he probably did this horrible thing? Then they probably never talk to him again. So I understand what John Cena is sitting in this situation. He's not Triple H. He's not, one of the grandsons or anything like that. But he's close enough that this is damaging to what he knows, the institutions that he knows, the relationships that he built. And you can't hide that under a no comment. So I appreciate that John Cena tried to hide it. Didn't try to hide it, rather. That he tried to at least talk about it in a sensible way. But what Twitter wants, what so many other people want, is concrete condemnation, or they want sympathy for other people. It's like, well, I also know people who have been falsely accused of rape. I see on TV all the time guys who are released from prison after spending 20 years in prison because DNA didn't connect between in a rape case. The world is a complicated place. Anybody who has a concrete opinion based off of one side of the story with two people that they don't know, Again, if you knew one person pretty well and you believe them, at least you have some standard of, well, I don't believe it because I know at least one of these parties in this situation. But if you don't know either person, then how the hell can you have such a concrete opinion about the situation? You don't know these people. That's why you say you have to let things play out. But these guys are in a difficult situation because they actually know the accuser. I guarantee you, if you talk to people who supposedly know the victim, they have concrete opinions on the other way. These guys are not concrete saying, oh, that's bullshit, it didn't happen. I think Kevin Nash maybe have said something that was approximate to that, and people got upset at him about this. Because he knows Vince. Vince made him a lot of money, made him a star. He wouldn't have a career without Vince. And that's the first thing you go to. These people wouldn't even be famous without Vince. Of course they're going to stick up for him. Some of them, maybe. But not all of them, you know. So you're in a situation where the most people should be able to do is ask the question. Is say, is this true? What evidence do we have of this? Let's let it play out. Let's let it play out. You know, because Vince McMahon is he's not just in a Harvey Weinstein position. He's in that Michael Jackson position, that Bill Cosby position, where even if he ends up walking around free next year, 2-3 years from now, people are still going to think he's guilty. People who never met him are going to think he's guilty because there are still people who think that other folks who were never convicted of anything were guilty. This is something you have to deal with the rest of your life. And so you have these guys giving answers that people don't like. Brian Solomon, who used to work at WWE, saying that, oh, Vince is never coming back. You guys don't have to, you know, what was his exact words? You can shake the Stockholm Syndrome or something like that. Again, guy who probably barely met Vince, barely knew him. You may have worked there, but did you hang out with them all the time? Would you have considered yourself a friend? No. You don't know these people. You know what I'm saying? Everybody who thinks that these human beings are remote controlled cars and they just turn because somebody pushed a button. Human beings are complicated. Human beings are trying to figure it out. I don't really even like the idea that people keep asking talent about this stuff because it is a massive distraction. And I'm trying to say, like, if I was like Randy Orton, what would my response be? Like, does it really matter what I think? Does it really matter, you know, that I am in this situation or, you know, thank God I'm not in that situation? The only thing you can say is no comments or, man, that's tough. Hopefully we can figure it out. We're going to take it seriously. None of which actually gets you anything. Because nobody knows anything. Likely doesn't know anything. I can't say to what John Cena knows or what he doesn't know. But it's a difficult situation. You know? So Randy Orton was speaking with Sports Illustrated. And he said this. I've got to say, I wouldn't be where I am without Vince McMahon taking a chance on me a handful of times. I would not be here today without Vince McMahon. But fuck, I'm reading this shit. When you've seen and read, I've seen and read, as far as commenting on that, it fucking hurts my heart. It hurts my heart. And that was it. You know, Seth Rollins had said something similar like, it's sick, it's disgusting, it makes him sad, it's, you know, yada, yada, yada. How do you expect these people to respond? That's my question. Like, what is making them uncomfortable do? Nobody's going to say, yay, I love rape. Nobody's going to come out and say, oh, it absolutely did not happen. Because they don't know. Nobody's going to do that. Everybody's going to be, you know, some level of disappointed that this situation has occurred. And anytime somebody doesn't give you the response that you want, you're like, oh, you're in a cult, or you're being kidnapped, you're in Stockholm syndrome. It's like, how about imagine your favorite uncle, your favorite cousin, your brother, your dad, somebody being accused of some really horrible shit. How quick do you flip on them? And if you say you flip on them so quickly, without anything actually being proven, then I would say that you're just not really a real human being, and you're probably lying. You're virtue signaling. Because anybody who has ever been in a difficult situation knows that you don't jump to any conclusions. You don't say anything concrete, and you don't jump into any conclusions. Maybe you clasp your hands together and you pray it's not real. You pray it's not happening. You pray it's not true. Because that's what my mom did. I remember, just to go back a little bit, I was also a teenager when this happened. My mom sat down and watched the news one day. She was watching the news. She had gotten a call. And she was yelling. And she said, turn on the news. I turned on the news. I was like, I don't know what I was watching. I remember watching my mama melt in the couch. Tears streaming down her face. Because I wasn't paying attention. I wasn't thinking that much of it. And then I saw a picture of my cousin on television. It's a manhunt from Detroit to Toledo because of a bank robbery. And she is just like, they're going to kill him. That was the first thing that she said out of her mouth. Oh, they're going to kill my nephew. They're going to kill my nephew. Now, he did get arrested and he served some time because he did do it. But you talking about this little boy that bounced on her knee. And now you got who knows how many strangers seeing him on television, knowing him only for being a bank robber. And you think the cops are going to kill him. Think about how complex that was, how terrible that was. And yet, she couldn't turn her back on him. He was still her nephew. Nothing he was going to be able to do was going to stop him from being her nephew. And she loved him. She loved him through the whole thing. But he was wrong. And everybody knew he was wrong. He admitted it eventually that he was wrong. Of course, he kept lying and saying he didn't do it. Ended up finding out that he did. But my mama has been in that situation multiple times where she's seen nephews running from the cops. And you have to figure out whether they did it or not. So you have to figure it out. You have to think about it. People who have been like, it's easy for people who never really experienced certain things to have certain attitudes. But when you legitimately been through some stuff, you've seen some things, and you're not trying to virtue signal and you're trying to be an honest person, the best you can do is say, damn, I hope it's not true. But if it is, you gotta be held responsible for your own actions. That's what most of these people are saying is that, man, they don't want to read this stuff. This stuff is horrible. You know? What are they supposed to say? I got a kick out of it? No. When you are confronted with, hey, your beloved family member or friend is really a horrible person, you have to try to figure it out. You want to hope that they can overcome it somehow. You want to hope that it's not real. But if it's proven that it is, it's going to be difficult. It's going to be difficult to continue having a relationship with that person and to actually, you're going to start questioning yourself. How good of a person are you? You know? Like when you see like your cousin on TV or something like that, grew up in this, not in the same house, but, same family. You start asking questions about whether, your upbringing, whether your mama was any good or whether your auntie was a good parent. All of these things swirl around They're not necessarily one-to-one comparisons. They don't have to be. When you're in a terrible situation like this, you hope that the truth comes out and something happens where you can walk away saying, man, we dodged it. Or at least you know better. I wasn't that wrong. But if it comes out the other way, then you really have some soul searching to do on your own. But you have to understand that sometimes people are not the people that you think they are. And sometimes people are not the person that other people think that they are. But I don't see anything wrong with John Cena's response, Randy Orton's response. I don't see anything wrong with Seth Rollins' response. I do have a problem with Bret Hart's response because, even though Bret knows Vince pretty intimately too, Bret is having way too concrete of an opinion after only seeing one side of it and doesn't know the other party. But then again, that's why everybody loves Bret. Bret loves to jump to conclusions. So we're in a situation where people are in complicated situations and they're having complicated responses, and people don't want that. They want clean cut, pick a side. It's like, what do you mean pick a side? That's not how the world works. That's how Twitter works. That's how social media works. When you're an anonymous account on social media, that's how it works. When you're talking about people you don't know, that's how it works. When you're a person who do know these folks, it becomes a little bit more difficult.